And as you know, for those who continue to listen to our Future of Retail podcasts, I love doing these podcasts because they introduce our audience and myself to some fantastic and forward thinkers about the world of retail, the shape of the future, their views, and all gleaned from experience, observation, and being students of our sector and, of course, broader sectors. One person I have been dying to get onto this podcast is my near and dear friend, Paul Greenberg. And Paul and I go back 15 years, at least, probably more. So welcome, Paul. Great to have you with us.
Hey, Brian, thanks so much for the invite. And it's lovely to chat, even over a video cast for your listeners. Thanks for the offer of bringing me on.
Absolute pleasure. And Paul, you're so well known. And when I pick out your CV, it's consummate with experience, from current executive chair, the Woolworths independent director role, all the way through to the co-founding of Deal Direct. This wonderful mosaic of a career, to use, I think, a term you've used. Paul, when you look at your career as a starting point for today, has there been any glue to this career as such?
Yeah, it's a very current theme. So I've just cracked my 65th birthday, and we like to look back a little bit. It's been a very non-linear journey, Brian. And I have to say, I started as a young man in psychological services, probably still my first love, and then stumbled into retail and a number of endeavors around retail. And retail is such a broad church, right? So, that's been an interesting journey in itself. So definitely non-linear. Definitely, I thank you for using that term mosaic, because I love it, a career mosaic. And I think I might have mentioned when we last chatted that I'm writing this book called Strings to Rope, essentially to help my adult children make sense of what their dad did when they were growing up, because it looked like a lot of different things.
Yes.
To say, well, that's life, guys, that the strings, the strands of endeavors that we're all involved with eventually do come together in a lovely, firm, strong rope. And I feel that's been my journey and still continues.
It does. And when we and others started in the world of retail, it seemed simpler in many regards. It was physically dominated, in fact, physically owned, of course. And now we live, to use your term again, a mosaic of offers, experiences, expectations. We have the infusion of technology at never before rates, which we'll talk about. But I think, some might say one way to predict the future is to look to the present as a guiding point. And as we work in these retail communities, both domestically and globally, when you look at some examples of retailers that you like, that seem to be forward thinking in the way they approach their business models, are there any call outs for you?
Yeah, I'd love to do a few call outs if that's okay with you. As you know, I'm very much in non-executive roles now, which is great. So I'm not in the operational day-to-day. We've both been there in executive positions at the front line. So it's really a privilege for me to work with great operators, more in an advisory or board role, and encourage them and watch what they do and learn an awful amount. So that's where I'm at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, where do we start? Retail's a broad church. You've asked for a few insights. I think we've only got about 20, 25 minutes together.
We do. And as we work in our retail communities and you through boards and the investor role and so forth, but you've seen, and I see, some wonderful retailers. And maybe it's a great opportunity to start these retailers operating in today who have a good monitor and radar for what the future might bring.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. I'd love to give a few retailers a shout out. And, I'd encourage any of your younger viewers, listeners who's starting out in retail to really tune into some of these people, because I still do. So the first one, I guess we're talking about the future of retail. We've got 20, 25 minutes together. Let's talk about 3 or 4 pillars. The first one is DTC retail, direct to consumer. So for a long time, I haven't been the only one saying that the good retailers are essentially going to be the ones that own the product in their store. The intermediated retailers and the big department stores, by example, will find it harder going, Brian, because essentially, the costs of doing business, the fact that they've got to share their margin through a very traditional supply chain. And my favorite guy is Simon Beard from Culture Kings, who obviously built a very sizable house brand, but around some well-known brands, using the traditional loss leader or recognized brands to bring in the foot traffic, and then curating his own brands. And where Simon was very strong, he tuned into social media influencers long before we realized that they were essentially becoming the new retailers. I mean, these are, sometimes single channel, young women or guys with millions of followers, AKA customers.
Yes.
And Simon tuned into those guys like no one else, and was remarkable to watch what he did. Absolutely amazing.
And putting out some remarkable content even to today. So a great example. Yeah.
So find Simon Beard from Culture Kings. He sold his business $600 million to AKA Brands. Wonderful story. Still young. Started in the markets on the Gold Coast. He's got a story and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about that piece, this interesting foresight, that it wasn't just about what am I doing today, but it's about what am I building and how am I, and what's the model that needs to change. So your opening commentary about, the classic intermediate, the role of the retailer as the intermediate, the broker, as it were. Well, now that is changing. And do you see that as being a more structural change in our industry going forward?
Very much so, and I think it's been going on for a long while. I was one of the malls the other day, and like you, I like to grab a coffee and see who's getting the foot traffic. And essentially, the brands that own the products in their store were the ones getting the real action. And even you've done so much good commentary on Kmart and the Anko brand, which is this behemoth.
Yes.
This behemoth of a business.
Absolutely. And how do you see the rise of, the Amazonian, Temu, Shein type models in this equation?
All right. So we said direct to consumer retail, follow that star because it's a hot one. Marketplaces, Brian, we have to stay with marketplaces. I said the other day, they're eating the world still. That was an old comment, software is eating the world. Then someone said marketplaces are eating the world. I'm saying they are, but their diet is changing. And again, I would refer your listeners to the guys over at My Deal. And, I chair Woolworths Market Plus, which is Big W, My Deal every day. And there's some powerful work going on there. Ryan Gracie and Mark Mansour are the two very talented execs there, and your viewers will find them on LinkedIn, your listeners. They'd be great to chat to because Mark was with eBay for many years. Ryan came through Catch, then into My Deal, and they're still on board now within the mighty Woolworths group, doing some fascinating things. Marketplaces have to be part of a good retail strategy, either selling on a marketplace if you're a smaller business, or ultimately becoming a marketplace yourself. The only caveat I would put on that is that the marketplaces that will thrive, and remember, some of them haven't thrived, right? And we know who those were that haven't. Is that you need to provide your customers the benefit of the long tail and this sort of endless aisle experience, but with the consistency of a retail experience. Unfortunately, a lot of the marketplaces, have this wonderful potpourri of product from a needle to an anchor, but customers get confused because they're not quite sure who they're buying from. And I think My Deal have done a good job. I'm biased, of course, because I work with Sean Senverte, the founder, but they've done a good job of understanding that distinction. The long tail is fantastic, but a very, very solid retail experience must underpin that. And of course, under Woolworths ownership, that ethos is only continuing.
I think they're great examples. I'm also looking at the world of AI as everybody is. And just a really simple example occurs to me, and it's this relationship between Shopify and ChatGPT as a working example. And it gets me to start to think how interesting that I could order a product. So I could initiate the search of a product. So your lovely jacket, I might decide I want a different color. Of course, the search engine will discover it for me, send it off to Shopify, and away it comes at the most simple, basic level. And of course, all my measurements will be downloaded and so forth. I will go nowhere near the classic online discovery, and I'll certainly won't go anywhere near a physical store. And I just wonder, is that one of the pieces in this puzzle that's starting to emerge, that the traditional channels can increasingly be bypassed?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, broadly AI, which is such a big tunnel to go into, I think it's been a wonderful boon and proving to be a wonderful boon for all business, but for retail particularly. I think those of us that are embracing it and using the power of this incredibly potent connected technology will do well. But you've known me for long enough. I always like to be a wee bit of a contrarian. I think you wouldn't have invited me on if I wasn't. And
Yeah, absolutely.
one of the points I'd like to make, especially for retailers like yourself and myself who've been, in traditional, if you like, established retail, is that if we assume, and this is more philosophy than practical advice, if we assume that AI will be accessible to everyone, the costs of Moore's law, the cost of the technology will come down, the power will double. And then ultimately, we've all got access to this potent machine. What's going to be the distinction? Because we're all going to be given the same path to the same place. I'm saying, let's go back to find our humanity, and perhaps our humility, and let's go back to people. So ultimately, brand and relationships are going to be the distinction. Yes, these potent tools are going to be brilliant to help us, but brand and our connection with people, like we were schooled in retail. It's about people, it's about relationships, about connection. I think that's really the future of retail, with AI sitting very comfortably behind it.
Yeah, and it brings me into a lovely quote, which not sure if you've heard before, so bear with me, but this commentary that I'd listened to that said, modern consumers don't just purchase goods, they construct identity. Future retail must evolve from selling products to enabling self-expression, personalization, and existential alignment. This beautiful piece.
Beautiful. And I mean, I think in there's a few things. I mean, Ariana Huffington of the Huffington Post said self-expression is the new entertainment. She said that quite a while ago. Yes. And that's embodied there, which it is. I mean, with social, it very much is the case. And yes, I mean, I agree that the generational change will also see, far more increased demands. And
It's so interesting. And coming back to Simon's business of Culture King, he's a standout, I think, in constructing this identity, this tribe, that builds to the brand, builds to the expression. And the product is the enabler to be part of that tribe.
Which, if I could just jump in there and say, there's another currency that we forget about. What is Simon's success? I love to use him, and I got to know him quite well. We work together. Authenticity is a currency. Yes. He's the real deal. This guy eats, sleeps, breathes, and streetwear.
Yes.
He lives it. He lives his business. There's, you can't. In my career, I've often had to fake it till I make it. There's no doubt about that. He is pure, raw authenticity. And I think it's a potent currency. I think customers will find us out if we're not exactly that. So the pressure's on.
Yeah, well, of course, in this hyper-connected world, I think what we're really saying is that presence, brand presence, experience, and so forth, becomes more valuable than ubiquity. Yet we have valued ubiquity traditionally. We've put a shop on every corner and we've gone for massive scale. But in fact, is that cycle into the future changing? I suspect it is, to the points you make. And what will that mean for the ocean of retail that's available to people? The frontier of differentiation.
It was staying with philosophy, my favorite word of the day is paradox, because I think there's very much an enormous amount of paradoxy, if there's such a word, going on.
There is.
One is ubiquity, as you say, the rise of Temu and Shein. These are enormous behemoths where, what are they? Are they logistics businesses? And I guess we should talk a little bit about logistics. They're faceless at many levels. They're ultimately proving whether we like it or not, that customers are choosing pockets over planet, and wallets over sustainability. And I understand the reasons why. It's easy to criticize it, but we're all watching our budget. So there are those. Then there are the unique tribes, as you say, that create this cult following, and Culture Kings is one fine example, and lots in the middle. But yeah, I mean, I think we also may be reaching a point where less can be more. We're all taught about the paradox of choice. When we start out in retail, customers expect, and demand pre-selection. We can't just throw everything at them unless it's a marketplace, and even that needs to be curated. So there's lots of paradoxes going on, and we could probably talk. I'm sorry, we only got half an hour or whatever. We could talk all day about some of those paradoxes, but there's I mean, why do you and I love retail? One is, sorry that I'm putting words in your mouth. One is it's a broad church.
Yeah.
So what is retail? I mean, we could talk all day about what is retail. I mean, it's such a broad church.
Yeah, it is.
I think, two, it's incredibly dynamic. However, I also think that the principles stay the same. Old wine in a new bottle, or plus je change, the French. My French is terrible. The more things change, the more they stay the same. These are all the philosophies, the paradoxes that as retailers, and certainly in retail leadership, we have to hold quite close to us before we make decisions that don't resonate with our customers.
And Paul, to pick up on this topic of logistics, fulfillment, one of the paradoxes I think about going forward is that there's more and more focus on this concept of logistical fulfillment, getting product faster to consumers in a personalized way. Yeah. And it's a differentiator for some businesses. But ultimately, if everyone does it, it's just the way the game is played. And I kind of wonder where the next frontier of innovation will come from. And I think a little bit about the whole piece around, this issue around where will we sit in terms of ethics, autonomy, dignity of consumers, if we're all going to inundate each other with messages about retail product, if we're all going to get it there super quickly. The paradox is fairly apparent, I suspect.
It is, and I think maybe you and I can get a little bit below. I wouldn't say depressed, but I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. The way the world's turning and which direction it's going in. I mean, if we're staying with logistics, excuse me, that's my earbud. That I haven't had a good day on technology, as you know. I think
done well.
One of the big revolutions that sort of we should be focusing more on is this idea of asset sharing, the sharing economy, collaborative consumption. I mean, Amazon Flex here in Australia has very quietly, I think, eaten quite a few of our lunches, and good on them. So I'd be keen to know as retailers how we're responding in terms of taking this wonderful capacity and taking it to demand. So that's one area that I think, the collaborative consumption, the sharing economy was kind of big for a while, then it went quiet. Now it's back with a vengeance. And so the Uberization of delivery is massive. I know we saw a lot of early stuff. I mean, a decade ago, the Australia Post were talking about drones. I think that'll all come back, the autonomous driving. That's just a blink away, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's going to be exciting. And but I think the battleground, we certainly were saying in consumer direct retail, in online retail, e-commerce, whatever you want to call it, is still delivery after all these years. I mean, 20 years ago, in Deals Direct, we used to say you'll get your parcel in 2 weeks, and customers were very happy with that. And when we over delivered in 10 days, they were delirious.
Yeah.
Now, you've alluded very well to the fact that when the bar rises, it stays risen, and it just sets a new baseline for us as an industry, which is tough because we can't all have the budgets of Amazon or Woolworths or Costco. So how do smaller operators or retailers find their way in the world? And I think they will answer those questions themselves. Their USPs will become their strength, will become their strings to rope.
Yeah, it's lovely, and time's starting to sort of conclude. And as you rightfully say, Paul, I for one, and for many, could talk for hours on these topics. But the infrastructural change is fascinating. We have, what have we got? 1,360 shopping centres in this country, all full of retailers, all trying to compete on something but there's these tectonic plates underneath that are shifting all the time. And in time to come, to cast into the future, the human spirit will prevail. Brand and presence matters. Building of tribe matters. But that experience we create at every touch point, it's not going to be that easy, but very rewarding.
I think you put it so well. So clearly your optimism bias is coming through. I share it.
Totally.
I think, I'd be saying to young people, it's still a great industry to get into. And, we do know that retail, like a lot of businesses, Darwinian, and there will be winners and losers, and there will be those that will fall by the wayside. And, you've been a very powerful commentator and very generous commentator on those retailers that haven't made it. Respect is deserved, but hopefully on their shoulders will come, great new businesses and new brands that will emerge, that will stay in touch and, keep customers engaged and keep doing good things for the economy. I mean, retail is such a wonderful industry, wonderful sector, not for the faint-hearted. There's easier ways to make a living, as I say to my sons, but still such a great sector, Brian. So thanks for those, very generous and for your ongoing support for the sector, which is, appreciated.
Well, and Paul, this morning I was with a tech company looking at an avatar of myself, and it was 10 kilos lighter and didn't have one wrinkle. So I thought maybe that is the future.
Well, my LinkedIn photograph's been photoshopped to hell and gone, and people often get a bit of a shock. I say it's cheaper than plastic surgery, and I'll stick to that. But look, it's all fun. I mean, that playfulness. You've been in this industry a long time, and the fact that you can just rejoice in having an avatar of yourself and wondering where that will take us and where that will go. But I mean, you said so. Basically, authenticity, trust. A frictionless experience where customers, feel very much that they've got some level of control. Don't forget old Bezos, the best customer service is no customer service, often misunderstood, but really saying, give the customer the wheel. If they want high touch, give it to them. If they want to drive the car themselves, let them do that. And I think these are all the key thematics that I'm so glad we've covered off on, because we could have gone down a few rabbit holes, but I think this will be more helpful for your listeners in terms of broad touch.
Well, Paul, delighted. Thank you very much for taking part in today's Future of Retail podcast. I can go back to previous conversations we've had. They've all been rich, and this is certainly one of the richer ones. So thank you and compliments, Paul. Paul Greenberg, fantastic. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Brian.